we're joined by the Mirror's Kevin Maguire, by the Mail's Andrew Pearce, by the Chair of Global Public Health at Edinburgh University, Professor Devi Sridhar, and by Shadow Education Secretary Kate Green. So welcome to all of you, a stellar panel this morning.
I wonder if I could start with you, Kate Green, because I just want to talk specifically about the testing and how it's affected the Labour Party leader, Keir Starmer, because as we know, he's working from home. He's not going to be able to do Prime Minister's questions today. What is the situation? How did he get a test? And when is the result likely to come? How has he personally been affected, as an example of the broader situation?
Well, I don't know the ins and outs of Keir's and his family's personal circumstances, and I don't think it would be appropriate to discuss an individual family's circumstances at all. But obviously everybody wishes them well, as we wish everybody well who is anxious about the result of a test.
Well, hang on. Sorry, if I may jump in. He has discussed it himself. So he has revealed publicly that his wife works in the NHS, and that's why they're entitled to a test. We're not revealing any trade secret here.
Piers, I know no more than that. I can only say I really hope that they get a result quickly if they haven't had it already, that the result is negative and that the family can get back on with their lives. And I hope that for everybody who's waiting for a test result.
But obviously the health of your leader and his family is of significance at a time, because it restricts his ability to do his job, and he can't even do PMQs today. So do you have an update on whether they've had the results of the test yet?
Here's, I have no idea. I really have absolutely no idea. These are not matters that I feel that families need to discuss with me.
With respect, Ms Green, sorry. I know you're getting clearly...
It's all right.
Sorry?
Call me Kate. Call me Kate.
Okay. Look, you may get annoyed by this, but your own leader will miss Prime Minister's questions today during a global pandemic. This is not an insignificant thing. And given that he himself has put out the details of how he was able to get the test through his wife working in the health service, I don't think it's unreasonable for us to ask you, as one of his team, for an update. You seem to be very irritated by the suggestion we should pursue a matter of public interest that he himself has talked about.
Well, I'm not picking a fight about this, but I have no more information to give you. What I think it does point up is the need for very swift testing and swift results. And I'd also say that, of course, in Parliament, where we were previously able to participate remotely, it is also possible to put alternative arrangements in place to help workers do their jobs, even if they have to be at home for self-isolation reasons. And I think it's a great pity we've lost some of that ability in Parliament.
Well, I was referring to Keir Starmer's situation as a reflection of the national picture. I mean, yesterday in the House of Commons, where he can't currently attend, we had MP after MP standing up talking about the fact that their constituents could not either get a test or were being told to travel huge lengths in order to do so. And Matt Hancock, the Health Secretary, seemed almost defeated at points where he kept saying, well, I'll look into those individual circumstances. The individual circumstances are relevant, aren't they? Because there is, as the Daily Mail describes it, a shambles at the moment over testing.
There absolutely is. And as you say, we're hearing stories from up and down the country of people unable to get tests, unable to get through to book a test. When they turn up, they discover actually there's nobody waiting for a test. There does seem to be capacity in some places, even though they've been told that there isn't. Then having to wait for results being lost. I was told just overnight of a school nurse who's desperate to get her hands on some tests. They've run out of the tests the schools have been allocated. They need, therefore, to send children home. There are no parents at home to look after the children. Grandparents can't step in because some of the local COVID restrictions mean households can't mix. It is an absolute shambles, and the government needs to get a grip.
All right, Professor Sridhar, let me bring you in here, because you've been on this testing thing right from the very start of this pandemic. It's all, you've mentioned it in every interview we've ever done with you. Channel 4 News did a fact check on the testing situation. Latest figures for NHS Test and Trace in England show 436,000 people were tested between August the 27th and September the 2nd. That's physical people. That's 25,000 fewer people than the previous week, a fall of 6%. In other words, an average of 62,400 people were being tested a day in the latest figures, compared to 66,000 a day. This number of people that are being tested, it's barely changed, actually, since the government stopped telling us how many people they were testing. All they talk about now is capacity. Matt Hancock constantly says we've got a capacity for over 300,000 tests. But if you're only testing 62,000 people a day, the capacity is meaningless. So what is going on here?
Yeah, it's comically depressing that we are in this situation. I truly do not understand why countries like Senegal and Vietnam and New Zealand, countries across the world have managed to get their testing up and running at scale. South Korea was on to testing in January. I mean, there was a clear way to go, and we're sitting here in September with schools reopening, universities going back, and a lot of people needing testing to go back to their jobs and to have, keep this virus suppressed so we can get on with life. And to be in the situation, I don't fully understand what's going wrong. I mean, it just feels like they didn't build up the existing local capacity through the NHS. The data has become very hard to track. It's every time, I mean, you look at the reports, they're different figures. They should just be giving every day how many people are tested, how many test positive, what is the capacity they're working towards, how many people tried to get a test and weren't able to. Otherwise, we're back in March where we don't have any idea how many people in the community actually have COVID.
It also means, doesn't it, that we don't really know how many people have got the virus. If the testing is now this calamitous, we have no real yardstick of any accuracy to say how many people at the moment have COVID in this country. The numbers they're putting out become meaningless.
Exactly. I think in the absence, especially of not having daily testing positivity, we don't really know how many people have it. And so what SAGE modelers are going to have to rely on are hospital admissions, and that being at least, again, back to March, of a baseline of at least people being admitted to hospital are still able to get tests. So we have some reliability in hospital admissions, but we've lost sight of community transmission now.
Kate Green, as the opposition, have you managed to get to the bottom of what the problem is with the testing? Is it a staffing issue? Is it a laboratory issue? Is it a chemical issue? I mean, we have been talking about testing being the key since March, and Boris Johnson stood up the other day at a press conference and told us about the moonshot of getting an extraordinary number of tests. We can't even fulfil the demand right now. Have you been able to get the information that the professor says she can't get?
No, and I think she's right to say that that means we don't actually know how widely and how fast the infection is spreading. And also we know that the contact tracing isn't being properly followed up, and that 80% of contacts aren't actually being reached. So it is a very worrying picture. I think it's a failure of planning. We knew all summer that schools were going back, that students would be going back to college and university. The Prime Minister said at the end of July that he wanted people back to work. That time should have been used to start beefing up testing capacity. And I think you're right to identify all the pressures, the lab pressures, the staffing pressures, temporary staff who were filling in for a time, going back to their usual workplaces. What we know, though, is that the time is now really running out to get a grip on this. We've got schools back, but children having to be sent straight back home again. We've got universities returning in the next few days. I think it is a massive failure of planning and preparing on the part of the government. Matt Hancock said yesterday that they were beginning now to talk to universities. They should have been doing that weeks ago.
A total disgrace. Andrew, I want to come to you, but we wanted to get Matt Hancock on to put these questions to him directly. The government boycott is now on day 141. Here's our little ticker chart here. We haven't seen any of the government since April to discuss the global pandemic, and our viewers can make their own judgment about that. Very few things, Andrew, unite you and Kevin, or indeed your organs, your papers. But today, front page of the Daily Mail, why are they still failing the test? Why are they still failing the test? And the Daily Mirror 8 and 9 failing the test. So unanimity there from two papers on very different sides of the political spectrum. What does that say, Andrew? I detect, I mean, The Sun, which has been very slavishly supportive of the government until now, very scathing first leader today, attacking this testing fiasco. When you've got The Sun, The Mirror and The Mail all describing your testing system as a disaster, it's a disaster.
There's no other way to call it. And when this government encouraged people, quite rightly in my view, to go back to work, to get back on public transport, to go back to work because they want to get the economy moving, it was important, it was essential that they stepped up the testing to enable people to go to work and feel that they're healthy. One of the worst parts of this is doctors are being sent home because they can't get a test. Doctors and nurses. That is really, really shaming. And there's no way to try and gild this. There's no way to try and put a gloss on it. The government is failing very badly on testing, and they have been from beginning to end. And it's one of the most important things. How embarrassing is it, as was pointed out in the programme just a moment ago, Senegal have got a great testing system, and the United Kingdom, one of the third or fourth richest countries in the world, has got a shambolic system. And the Prime Minister's used very grandiose language about world-beating. It's embarrassing.
Well,
it's also
Kevin,
a dereliction of duty.
Yeah, and the Sun, Operation Moonshot. I mean, this ridiculous pie-in-the-sky attention-grabbing thing about we're all going to have hundreds of millions of tests. It's completely for the birds. We can't even test more than 62,000 people a day. We've got now ridiculous queues all over the country. People messaging us today, Clint on Twitter said to us, I have a 2-year-old son who has symptoms of COVID. Imagine how worrying that must be. I've been trying for 2 days to get a test. The nearest site is Carlisle or Edinburgh. I live in Oxford. It would be a 532-mile round trip. Steve on Twitter, I've been trying all night, every hour to get a test. Just as it hit 7 a.m, the site is now frozen. It's impossible. D on email, I've been offered a test 478 miles away from my home. Carol on email perhaps sums it up best. Maybe they should change test and trace to trace a test. Kevin.
It's not funny, though, is it?
It's not funny. And, Kevin, I mean, the point is we can only unlock ourselves as a country in a public health and economic way if we get the testing right. And as Professor Sridhar rightly said, we've known since January the importance of testing. Matt Hancock, now in September, saying he couldn't have predicted the demand. I mean, that should be a resignation matter for me.
Yeah, well, I think he should have gone several times over other issues, but until we get a vaccine, it's absolutely crucial you have a proper test and trace system. And Boris Johnson, Matt Hancock too, they like to talk about moonshots, talk about big. Well, actually, most of the promises are just moonshine because they're never delivered, and they repeatedly over-promise and under-deliver. And the reason I agree with Andrew agrees with me, the Mail agrees with the Mail with the Mirror on this, is it's a key matter of government competency, and it's incompetency here. And it has cut through. They're worried now in Downing Street that people are noticing the long queues. They can't get tests. The reintroduction of rationing is an utter failure because the government line was, if you have any doubt, get a test. Now they're saying you won't be able to do that. A few weeks, let's see what happens in a few weeks. They've got the structure of this wrong from the beginning. They put too much emphasis on contracts to big private companies with call centres. They were not using the public sector enough. They went to the private sector. It hasn't actually delivered. The laboratory capacity has been poor. It's not sufficient. And where is Baroness Didal, the Conservative peer who was put in charge of this and is going to be rewarded with a promotion to run the successor body to Public Health England? It is a shambles. It's an utter shambles, and it's a fatal shambles.
I mean, you could hardly make this up, Professor Sridhar. This is positive, apparently, our fiasco. It's not what everyone thinks it is. It is a positive situation.
Yeah, and actually, the point that you raised, what's going to be really catastrophic is in 2 to 3 weeks, if they're not able to get the testing on place and the restrictions don't work and hospital admissions keep increasing, and so our hospitals are filling up and ICUs are filling up, they will be forced, like Israel, into a national lockdown. Because if your hospitals are collapsing and people will die if they cannot get a bed and oxygen, you have little other choice as a government. That's what happened in Israel.
Kate Green, would you, in the opposition, support another national lockdown?
We're absolutely desperate. Everybody's absolutely desperate not to get there. And what's happening now is, of course, the government's letting down all the businesses, the schools, the universities, the NHS and care workers who are working so hard to try to keep everyone safe and to maintain social distancing, to have cleaning regimes and all the rest, but they're being let down by government ministers. A national lockdown is disastrous for our economy, our jobs, obviously. It's disastrous for people's mental well-being, which is already, I think, in many cases under a lot of pressure if they've not been able to see family and friends for a very long period. So we have to do everything we possibly can to avoid that. And I'm afraid the government is letting everybody in the country down.
Andrew, this comes down to government competence, as we've discussed, and it comes from the top. And there is a growing feeling, and some very damaging pieces I've seen. I think Robert Peston did one, others have done one, suggesting that there's real sort of mutiny growing now in the Tory ranks about the failure of competence of the government, that they accept maybe unprecedented times and so on. But what they can't tolerate is this ongoing incompetence. We saw it with education. We're now seeing it just with general testing, a failure to govern the country competently.
Look, I was in the Commons yesterday. I spent all morning there talking to MPs, taking the political temperature. There is no doubt there is a growing sense of unease. I think there's still massive support on the backbenches for Boris Johnson, but these MPs know when a government gets a reputation for incompetence, you often find it's very hard to ever get it back. Think about John Major's government back in 1992 when it came tumbling out the exchange rate mechanism. The country lost their faith in the Tories' ability to govern the economy, and they were swept out of power. So they've really got to get this sorted. Yeah. The way they're being judged at the moment is on the pandemic, and this testing failure is simply not good enough.
Kevin, it will alarm everyone to hear of the possibility of another national lockdown.
That's not going to happen.
It will, and the government is, as Kate Green was saying, everyone is. The government's very, very anxious to avoid it. But there are contingency plans in Whitehall. They're drawing up, and it could be a 10 p.m. or a 9 p.m. curfew on pubs and restaurants, trying to get everybody home again. But we saw with Israel, it just couldn't get a grip on the spread of the virus. And we're seeing now infections, over 3,000 new infections every day. That will lead to higher hospital admissions, people in intensive care, and sadly, probably deaths down the end of the line. They'll be very anxious to do it, but more than 10% of the country now has local lockdowns. They're spreading. A national lockdown isn't out of the question, because we go into winter without a proper test and trace system, the virus spreading, and then we enter the flu season, and then we can't be out of doors. We've got to go indoors more. So that makes you at greater risk, because that's when the pandemic...
And to all the idiots, Kevin, to all the idiots saying, well, why should we bother? This doesn't affect me, blah, 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 blah. It will affect you when there's a national lockdown again. And they'll be the first people to say, this is a disgusting intrusion into my liberty.
Well, let's do everything we can.
You're part of the problem. You're one of the reasons it happened. So all the people not taking it seriously, take it seriously. Thank you to our stellar panel. And to Kate Green, thank you. And please send our best to Keir Starmer, even if you do it in a private capacity.